It began with her name. Not the one her mother gave her when she first arrived in the world screaming and red and full of life, but the name the house carved into her with time. Ugana. It meant father's pride once. But no one said it with pride anymore. They twisted it, bent it. Every meal became a performance. Her stepmother, tall and sharp-eyed, would sit at the head of the floor mat, a gourd of pap in her lap, and the others, her step-siblings, her step-aunts, even the smallest cousin barely old enough to hold a spoon, would gather in a loose half-circle and begin the chant. Ugana the shame. Ugana the worm. Ugana the belly that brought flies. It would echo through the room like a drum beaten off rhythm. Sometimes they clapped. Sometimes they smirked. But always they waited for her to speak. And she would. Because if she didn't, the food passed her by. And her stomach, already folded into itself from earlier refusals, would moan like an abandoned child. So she would say it. I am Ugana the shame, she would begin, voice light, trying to make it sound like a song. I am Ugana the worm. I am the belly that brought flies. And if her voice shook, or if her lip curled in the smallest frown, someone would hiss. No food for snakes who don't smile. So she learned to smile. She shaped her lips into crescent moons, even as her eyes betrayed the storm inside. She practiced in the mirror. Smile without showing too much teeth, without looking mad, without seeming false. A humble smile. An accepting smile. A smile that could trick even hunger into thinking it belonged. The meals weren't grand. Swallows with thin okra. Beans soaked too long. Bitter leaf soup made too bitter. But when you're starving, anything becomes holy. And so each time she whispered the cursed chant, she closed her eyes and imagined what food used to taste like before it was coated in shame. Only once did she refuse. She was 12 then. Her bones were aching from growing too fast in silence, and her belly had already gone 2 days without a full meal. Her stepmother called, the chant began, and Ugana stood silent. Not a scream. Not a plea. Just silence. Her stepmother's eyes narrowed. You won't say it? She asked. Ugana stood taller. I am Ugana, she said. Just that. Not twisted. Not bruised. Just her name as it was. The slap came so fast she didn't see the hand. The bowl of pap spilled. Her cheek burned. You'll starve for a week, the woman hissed. And she did. A week of hunger so sharp it carved poems in her ribs. She drank rainwater. Chewed raw leaves from the back of the compound. Watched her step-siblings eat and leave scraps on purpose, tossing them just out of reach. On the 7th night, her mother's sister came to visit. She brought oranges and a bundle of dried fish wrapped in cloth. She asked, Why is Ugana so thin? They lied. She's sick. Refuses food. Ugana said nothing. That night, when everyone slept, she crawled to the wrapped fish. Just a finger-sized strip. Just enough to remind her body it still mattered. But her stepbrother caught her. In the morning they made her eat the chant. Not speak it. Eat it. They carved the words into a yam peel with a small knife. Ugana the shame boiled it. Served it on a broken plate. Eat your name, they laughed. Taste who you are. She chewed. Swallowed. Did not cry. That night, her belly cramped like it was folding inside out, and still she said nothing. She only held herself and whispered her true name, just once, like a secret prayer. Ugana. The next morning her voice was gone. She could still make sound. But the words refused to come. Her throat burned when she tried. She opened her mouth to call the chicken back into its pen and nothing came. Tried to ask for salt. Nothing. They laughed. You've eaten your tongue now? Worms don't speak. They still made her chant. But now she had to mouth the words. Smile bigger, they would say. Bigger. She bared her teeth like a wolf learning submission. Some nights she dreamed of swallowing the chant, but this time letting it grow into something else. Something hard, something sharp, something that would not dissolve in her belly but rise. She'd wake with sweat in her palms and the echo of her voice in her head. It sounded different now, like it came from deep inside the ground. In the silence, her hunger changed. It no longer craved just food. It began to crave truth, crave sound. Crave her name, full and wide, said with breath and reverence. By the time she was 14, the chant was still required, but something had shifted. Her smiles had stopped looking like submission. They looked like knowing. She would say the words, silently of course, but her eyes did not bow. Her head stayed high. They noticed. Once, her stepsister flinched mid-chant. What are you smiling at like that? She snapped. Ugana just tilted her head. Didn't break eye contact. Didn't need to speak. The chant had become a mirror. And the ones who'd created it started seeing themselves in it. Twisted, unkind, ugly. But they couldn't stop. Because power was a meal too, and they were hungry for it. Just as she once was. But now Ygana's hunger had changed. It was sharper, cleaner. It waited, not for food, but for a moment, a day. A single breaking point when her true name would echo again, unchained from their laughter. And when that day came, she would not whisper. She would feast. Ygana's smile grew roots in her face. It began as something learned, a mask she wore to eat, to exist, to be permitted space at the mat and a corner to sleep. But now at 15 it had become fixed. Not a choice, a condition. Her lips stayed curled even when no one watched. Her cheeks ached by midday. When she woke, her face was already smiling. When she dreamed, her mouth curved upward even as her eyes wept. The muscles at the corners of her mouth throbbed with dull fire. Still she held the shape. Always. They praised her for it. She knows her place. She's finally grateful. She's not angry like before. Her stepmother called it a miracle. Her stepbrother said it was proof that shame, if fed right, could bloom into obedience. No one saw the cracks forming underneath. Ygana's smile no longer felt like hers. It felt like something else had climbed beneath her skin, something with claws and patience. When she looked into mirrors, small, broken ones with cracked edges and warped glass, her reflection smirked back. Not smiled. Smirked. Just a breath too wide. Just a shade too deep. The curve of her lips was familiar, but the intention behind it wasn't. Sometimes her reflection blinked before she did. Sometimes it didn't blink at all. She tried not to stare too long. The worst part was her tongue. It began to sting each time she spoke her name. Not the cursed chant, that had long since become a quiet pantomime, but her true name. The one her mother whispered once, in secret, on the 7th day of her birth when no one was listening. Ygana. When she mouthed it alone, behind the chicken coop or at the riverbank, her tongue would burn. A sharp, silvery pain, as though the name were a blade too pure for a mouth trained to lie. The more she whispered it, the brighter the pain grew. Her throat would tighten. Her teeth would clench. But still she said it. Because saying her name, even if it hurt, reminded her that she still owned it. She began to speak it in rhythm, in breath, in song. Ygana. 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 Not loud. Not defiant. Just steady. The chants before meals continued. She smiled as they laughed. They never noticed that she stopped mouthing the full chant. She mouthed only her name now, nothing more. And her reflection began to notice. At first it watched her differently. Less mockery, more attention. The tilt of its head matched hers too well. The lips curled slightly at odd moments. And one night, as she leaned over a basin to rinse her hands, her reflection didn't move. She blinked. It didn't. She flinched. Grinned. Then it whispered. Not aloud. Not with voice. But inside her. A quiet, crawling sound behind her ear. Say it louder. She jumped back, nearly dropping the basin. Water spilled over the ground and soaked the hem of her wrapper. She spun around, heart pounding, breath caught. No one was there. Only the still water settling again. And her smile. What? Eternal. Ygana didn't tell anyone. Who would believe her? They already called her silent. They said her eyes were too empty, her mouth too full of false joy. They said obedience had hollowed her into something usable. But inside, something else had begun to awaken. It started with sounds, faint, echoing things. Cracks in her voice when she repeated instructions. A tremor in her breath when forced to recite the house chores aloud. When she carried firewood or fetched water or stood too close to her stepmother's rage, she felt a pressure build behind her jaw. And at night, when the house grew still and the only light came from moonbeams breaking through the rafters, she would hear it again, breathing that didn't match hers. Full, steady, waiting. Something ancient had begun listening. Through the cracks in her voice. Through the wounds in her name. It didn't speak in full yet, only in glimpses. A hum behind her ears when someone insulted her. A ripple in the water when her stepbrother sneered. Once, her reflection mouthed a word she didn't know. Aledu. She said it aloud. Her tongue bled. The salt in her spit burned her lips. But she didn't stop smiling. She could feel it watching her, not just the reflection but something behind it. Something that lived inside the places where language broke and silence ruled. It was old, older than the name she bore, older than the chants, older than the curses whispered before meals. It was waiting. And her smile, the one they fed with humiliation and trained into permanence, had become the door. One morning she woke with her cheeks raw, small cracks at both corners of her mouth. Dried blood. Her smile had split during the night. Her stepmother noticed. What happened to your face? Ugana smiled wider. Too much joy, she said. The woman stared, unnerved. Ugana walked to the courtyard, lifted the broken mirror by the well and smiled into it. The reflection didn't move. Grinned. Wider. And Ugana, tongue aching, cheeks torn, eyes steady, whispered her name again. This time something whispered back. It was the sound that betrayed the world first. Not a scream or a crack, but something smaller, so small it almost went unnoticed. A spoon lifting from a bowl of soup, ringing with her name. Ugana had been seated quietly on the floor mat, cross-legged, holding the chipped wooden spoon they always gave her, the one with the hairline split down the handle so you had to grip it a certain way or risk a sliver. The stew that evening was sour, thin, mostly oil and salt. Her portion was smaller than the others, of course. The curse chant had been recited just moments before, and she'd done her part, smiling as always, whispering only her name instead of the full insult. No one noticed. But then, as she lifted the first spoonful to her lips, the air shifted. The spoon trembled. Not from her hand but from within. And it said her name. Not loudly. Not in voice. But in sound. A hum vibrating against the inside of the wood, resonating softly through her fingertips, up her arm and straight into her ears. Ugana. She blinked. Her hand froze midair. She looked around the room but no one seemed to have heard it. Her stepmother was busy smacking a fly away from her own bowl, muttering curses under her breath. Her cousin was licking the side of a calabash. The younger children were slurping loudly. All of them carried on, unaware. Ugana brought the spoon closer again. It said her name again. Quieter this time, like it was shy. And then she whispered back. I'm here. The stew in the spoon rippled. Only the stew in her spoon, no one else's. A small wave rolled across the oily surface, though there was no breeze. She lowered the spoon slowly and let it hover over the bowl. The bubbling stew below twitched, then stilled. She ate nothing that night. Instead she listened. The next day it happened again. But this time it wasn't her own spoon. It was her stepmother's. As the woman stirred the pot, Ugana was sweeping nearby, bent low over the floor. The long wooden spoon scraped the bottom of the pot, and in between those strokes she heard it, clear and deliberate. Ugana. The stepmother paused, frowned, stirred again. Ugana. Ugana didn't react. She kept sweeping. Her smile sat perfectly on her face. She heard the name echo twice more that day, once from the metal handle of the door as she gripped it, and again in the soft clink of her cousin's bowl falling into the basin. Each time the voice was hers but not hers. It came from objects, not mouths. Echoes from places she hadn't touched. Sound where there should be silence. By the third night the food began reacting. She was given a smaller bowl of yam porridge, more pepper than yam, but when she dipped her spoon in, the stew hissed. A soft bubbling like laughter under a breath. Her cousin, a wide-eyed boy of 7 with a scratchy voice, turned to look at her. Then down at her bowl. He blinked. Then he dropped his own and screamed. The food is laughing. Her food is laughing. Everyone froze. Ugana sat perfectly still. The room fell into shocked silence. The boy began to cry, wailing as though something had clawed into his chest. Her stepmother rose so fast her wrapper unraveled at one side. What did you do? She snapped, grabbing Ugana's arm. What did you feed him? Nothing, Ugana said. The pot behind them began to hiss. Louder. Sharper. Then from the clay stove came another name-shaped breath. Ugana. This time the others heard it. Her stepbrother dropped his gourd. Her aunt gasped. The cousin stopped crying mid-sob and pointed. It said her name. Ugana stood slowly. I didn't touch it, she said. Which was true. The pot trembled again, stew inside sloshing from side to side though no one stirred it. Steam rose and twisted into what looked like a crooked smile. The air thickened with the smell of burning pepper and old secrets. Her stepmother's lips trembled. What are you? She whispered. Ugana turned to her, still smiling, because the smile had never left. But her eyes no longer bowed. They glinted. I'm the name you fed, she said. Her voice sounded different now. Not louder. Just wider. It filled the room like smoke. Not heavy but inescapable. And the pot behind her whispered her name again, like a lullaby sung in reverse. Later that night, when the house was asleep, Ugana sat beside the cooking stones. She watched the embers pulse. One by one the spoons leaned toward her. The clay bowls faced her like listening ears. Even the old calabash, cracked and patched with thread, rolled once toward her foot. She said nothing. But everything else said her name. The morning was quiet. Not the kind of peaceful quiet that comes with cool breeze and calm hearts, but the sharp-edged, heavy kind. The kind that settles around you like eyes behind a closed curtain. Ugana rose from her mat just as the cocks began to cry. Her wrapper clung to her skin. Her back ached and her face, her always smiling face, felt brittle, stretched too thin, like dried yam skin left too long in the sun. She walked to the outer compound with a familiar rhythm. Bare feet, hard steps. Her body had memorized the path to the cooking stones, the basin, the broom, the chants. But something in her mouth itched, not pain, not hunger, but tension. As if something was about to split. Her stepmother stood waiting. The morning meal, cold plantain mash, sat in a wide bowl. Beside it, the wooden spoon. Her own spoon. As usual, the chant began. Ugana the shame. Ugana the worm. Ugana the one who eats her own name. Her stepbrother sang it in a mocking tone, clapping off beat. Her cousins joined. Her aunt chuckled softly. Even the flies seemed to hum along. Ugana stepped forward, her smile rising like muscle memory. But this time her mouth did not open. She blinked. She tried again, the slight parting of lips, the drawing of breath, the gentle twist of jaw that would bring the familiar chant pouring out. Nothing. Her lips refused. They stayed together. Not clenched. Just still. Her smile wavered. Her lips trembled. Her jaw shook. The heat rushed to her face, but she wasn't blushing. She was burning, not with shame but with something far older. A sharp noise rang in her ears, like a bell struck deep underwater. Her tongue flattened against her teeth, trying to move to push the chant out. Still nothing. Ugana, her stepmother snapped. Say it. Ugana lifted her eyes. Her cheeks quivered. Say it, her aunt barked. Her mouth moved, barely, but her voice refused to come. Behind her teeth, her tongue lay coiled like a trapped bird, twitching. She tried to mouth the cursed words again, the ones they fed her for years like boiled lies. But the name tangled in her throat. She tried to speak it anyway. And a noise escaped, but not the chant. Not even her name. It was a low, throaty hum. Not human. Not animal. Just sound. Raw and round and unfinished. Her stepbrother burst into laughter. Is that your voice now? Like a frog under a basket. Try again, said the aunt. Smile harder. Ugana's lips stretched, then faltered. Something underneath them pulled the wrong way, like a muscle trying to unlearn years of obedience. She looked down at the food. Her stomach nodded. Her hand reached forward, then stopped midair. The spoon began to tremble. No one touched it. But it wobbled gently in the bowl, rocking like it had heard something. And the ringing in Ugana's ears grew louder. Sure. Unbearable. She stepped back. I said say it, her stepmother shouted. But Ugana turned away. And ran. She didn't know where she was going. Only that her mouth would not let her curse herself, and her voice was no longer hers to command. It had risen once already. From the food. From the spoons. From the breath of things. And now her own body refused to lie. She ran past the huts and down the slope toward the riverbank, where the palm trees bent low and the earth held its breath. She sat by the water. Not crying. Just breathing. Her mouth tingled. Her face throbbed. She placed her hands on her lips, gently, and felt the tremble there. The shape of something forming, not speech, not yet, but presence. Her reflection in the river was still. Her smile was gone. She stared at her face. And the face stared back, not with mockery but with a kind of question. That night, sleep came like a wave dragging her down. Her body folded into the mat, heavy with heat, her lips dry and cracked from a day of silence. Her stepmother had refused her food again, but this time it didn't matter. The hunger was quieter now, not sharp. Not wild. Just a slow throb of space. She dreamt of fire. But not flames. A kind of red mist, moving through trees, humming through bowls and broken spoons. Her name drifted on the air like dust, not spoken but remembered. Then from deep inside her, her voice began to rise. But it wasn't her doing. She didn't control it. It whispered from her own mouth, slow and sure. But not Ugana. It whispered, Aledu. Again, Aledu. Each time her body twitched. Her hands opened. Her spine arched. And still, the voice kept rising, whispering that name over and over, like a prayer, like a storm, like a secret that had waited too long. The walls of the house groaned. The mirror cracked. And her stepmother in the room next door woke choking on dust. Ugana lay still. But her mouth moved, whispering the name that did not belong to the curse. And outside in the compound the bowls began to hum. The next morning Ugana woke with her lips raw, but her smile was gone. Not just faded, undone. She felt her cheeks. They were soft loose. Her jaw unclenched. Her tongue no longer burned. She sat up. The word, Aledu, still echoed in her head, ringing through her teeth like a song passed down by blood. She stood and looked at herself in the mirror. Her face had changed. Not in form but in feeling. Her eyes no longer avoided their own reflection. Her mouth belonged to her now. She opened it slowly. And the first word she said was not her name. It was a name older than her bones, older than the family that fed her shame. A name that her voice had remembered before her memory could. Aledu. And somewhere just beyond the walls of the house, something listened. And smiled back. The morning was quiet again, but it held a different weight this time. Not the tight silence of fear or the crouching silence of pain, but a silence that watched. A silence that waited. Ugana woke before the others, her body light, her face bare of the smile that had once carved itself into every waking moment. She sat up slowly, ran her hands over her belly and felt nothing. Not emptiness. Not pain. Not the deep clawing ache of hunger that had lived inside her like a second heartbeat for years. Just stillness. She pressed her palm gently against her midsection. It was flat, yes, but not hollow. There was no twisting. No gurgle. No cramp. Her body felt calm. Even her breath came slower, as if it had joined the quiet. She stood, wrapped her faded cloth around her and walked outside. The compound was still half dreaming. The sky stretched orange and pink across the horizon, birds chirping lazily. The fire pit crackled faintly as her stepmother stirred the coals, preparing the morning meal. The smell of smoke and oil and stale cassava hung in the air. Ugana watched from the corner. She was expected to chant before she could eat. That was always the rule. Say the shame name, earn your portion. Smile and speak. Bow and swallow. But today she stayed silent. She made no move to step forward, didn't open her lips to recite the chant or even whisper her name. She simply stood. Her stepmother looked up. You're late. Ugana didn't answer. You want to go hungry? Still she said nothing. A few of the cousins turned to look. One elbowed another. Her stepbrother narrowed his eyes. The chant began anyway. Ugana the shame, Ugana the worm. But she didn't move. Didn't join in. Didn't smile. The food was served and no one offered her a bowl. She stayed in her spot, back straight, lips sealed, hands folded in front of her. And her stomach did not growl. It did not twist in protest. It did not even whisper. She sat on the edge of the compound wall, watching them eat. The porridge was watery, with a few slices of unripe plantain and a single boiled egg shared between two bowls. Her cousin licked his spoon. Her aunt smacked her lips. Her stepbrother complained it was too salty. Her stepmother tore a piece of bread and shoved it into her own mouth. Then paused. She frowned. She spat into the fire. What is this? She muttered. She tore another piece, popped it in, chewed, then spat again. This bread tastes like ash. The others looked at her. Maybe it burned? Her sister offered. No. It's not burned. It's wrong. She threw the rest of the loaf aside. Her cousin picked it up and tried it, then gagged. It's bitter? The whole compound turned their eyes to Ugana. She just sat there. Eyes steady. Breath slow. Still silent. Her stepmother stood slowly. Her jaw tightened. You think this is your doing? She asked. Ugana blinked. She didn't nod. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, her lack of hunger became louder than a scream. She rose and walked to the cooking stones. Bent over and watched the pot. The stew inside no longer bubbled. It pulsed. Like a heartbeat. Like it was breathing. She reached out and dipped her fingers in. No burn. The oil curled around her skin like smoke around firewood, familiar but not consuming. Behind her, her stepbrother whispered, She's feeding on something else. The words floated through the air and landed beside her. And they were true. Ugana was full. Not of food, but of warmth. It began in her belly, then spread to her ribs, her shoulders, her throat. It was like being wrapped in late morning sun. Like standing under a tree whose shade bent just for you. She didn't know where it came from. Only that it wasn't hers alone. It was memory. It was name. It was something passed from mouth to mouth, bowl to bowl, through spoons and silence and breath. She walked back to her corner and sat again. Her stomach still didn't stir. But around her the others grew uneasy. The food tasted wrong now. Not just the bread. The stew grew sour. The yams too hard. The pepper too sharp. And yet Ugana did not eat. And she did not starve. That evening her stepmother tried again, kneading new dough, starting fresh porridge. She watched the fire carefully, stirred slowly, measured each pinch of salt and pepper. She whispered small protections under her breath, words she'd learned from her own grandmother. But when she tasted the first spoon, she spat again. Dry ash on her tongue. She's cursed the food, her aunt hissed. No, the old uncle croaked from the far end of the room. She's simply no longer hungry. They stared at him. He was nearly blind, hunched, with hands that shook from age. But his voice was clear. Some spirits eat shame until they've swallowed it whole, he said. And when there's none left, they begin to taste the world differently. Ygana looked at him. Their eyes met. He bowed his head. That night, the house was quiet again. But this silence was fear. Not Ygana's. Because now they watched her. Watched the girl who didn't need food. Watched the girl who sat through chants without flinching. Watched the girl whose silence tasted sweeter than their bitter stew. And they wondered, what else had she stopped needing? And what had she started becoming? Ygana walked barefoot, the dust of the village trailing behind her like the final breath of a long-held lie. Her feet were calloused, her ankles smudged with old charcoal, but she moved with the ease of someone no longer trying to be unseen. For once, she wasn't sneaking out under threat of punishment. She wasn't stealing silence. She was claiming space. The paper in her hand was soft from folding, its edges frayed from being handled too often. It was nothing more than a torn scrap from the old ledger her aunt used to keep cassava weights, now scribbled on with charcoal ash from last night's fire. The words written on it were not hers. Not really. They were the name they'd given her, warped and weaponized. Ygana the shame, Ygana the worm, Ygana the one who eats her own name, layered in mockery, carved over the truth of her. She had written it all out in one line, long and unbroken, like a snake shedding its skin. Now she walked to bury it. The forest past the last hut had no clear boundary. It crept closer each year as though curious. Vines reached toward clay walls. Birds sang in unfamiliar tongues. The path narrowed the deeper she went, until even the sun had to squint through the thick canopy. But she wasn't afraid. The forest felt aware. Not welcoming exactly. Not soft. But listening. She passed a twisted tree with roots that resembled fingers, then a stone shaped like a sleeping woman. The earth here was darker. More alive. Each step sank just slightly, like the land was tasting her footsteps. When she found the spot, a hollow between three trees bent like elders in mid-conversation, she knelt. The paper trembled slightly in her hand, though no wind stirred. She dug the hole with her fingers, soil caking under her nails. It didn't take long. The earth parted easily as if it had been waiting. She stared at the paper one last time. Then folded it in two. Then in four. And whispered, "You are not me." She buried it. Pressed it down. Covered it gently with soil like one might tuck in a restless child. Then she closed her eyes. And said the name that had waited in her chest for years, not one she had read or heard or been given, but one she had remembered. A name. She didn't know where it came from. Only that it burned less than Ygana. That it tasted like tree bark in morning fog. That it sang in the back of her mouth before it ever reached her lips. "I am a name," she whispered, her forehead touching the ground. The trees shifted. Not visibly. But something in the air leaned inward. A breeze passed through the leaves above, low and spiraled, like breath moving across the surface of still water. She opened her eyes. And the wind whispered her name back. A name. A name. Not as echo but as answer. She didn't smile. Not the trained smile of meals and obedience. But her mouth curled anyway, soft, uncertain, like the first fire sparked after rain. The leaves rustled again. And something changed inside her. A new stillness. A full exhale. A quiet so pure it rang. She stood and turned from the buried name. The path behind her looked different now. Wilder. Narrower. As if the forest had sealed itself behind her. But she wasn't lost. She no longer followed paths. The walk back was slow. She heard everything now, the ants beneath roots, the sigh of shifting bark, the small animals tucking themselves into hollows. Even the wind felt like it bowed slightly as she passed. When she returned to the edge of the village, the dust no longer clung to her. It parted. She walked through the courtyard, head high, barefoot still. The cousins stared from behind the cooking shed. Her aunt frowned. Her stepbrother stopped mid-step. Her stepmother stood on the porch with a bowl in hand, paused like someone trying to decide if they were dreaming. Ygana said nothing. Because Ygana was buried now. That night they didn't call her for the evening meal. The chanting stopped halfway through the usual insult. Her absence pulled tighter than her presence ever did. The stew turned bitter again. The oil smoked without fire. And the old uncle muttered to himself, "That girl's name has left the room." She didn't eat. And she wasn't hungry. She lay on her mat, staring at the roof, the name humming in her chest like a steady drumbeat. Her breath matched it. Her blood listened to it. And when she closed her eyes, the trees whispered, "A name, a name." And for the first time in her life, her name didn't hurt. The sun dipped low, painting the compound in amber and ash. Dinner time. Smoke curled from the cooking stones, bitter and fast, like it knew it wasn't welcome. The air was thick, not just with heat but with the weight of old routines. The bowls were placed in the usual circle. The same chipped ones, the same order. Her aunt counted them out loud, more for habit than need. "Ugana," her stepmother barked. She didn't flinch. She sat still, cross-legged on the ground near the edge of the gathering, hands in her lap, gaze level. "Come," the woman said. "Say it." Ugana rose, walked slowly to her bowl, the smallest, worn thin from scrubbing. She looked down. It was empty. Not a single grain of yam, no drop of stew. Nothing. "You didn't say your name," her cousin said, smirking. "Say it," her stepbrother chimed. "Or no food. That's the rule." Ugana looked at them, then at the bowl. "I said it," she whispered. Her aunt scoffed. "We didn't hear it." Ugana stepped back from the circle. Her hands remained by her sides, relaxed. "I said the name that matters." The cousin snorted. Her aunt rolled her eyes. Her stepmother took a threatening step forward, but just then from the center of the compound a sound echoed. Laughter. Not from any of their mouths. Not from anyone at all. From the bowl. Ugana's bowl. The empty one. A light, clear laugh, not mocking, not cruel but sharp and sure. The kind of laugh that cracked the surface of something old and buried. The compound froze. The laughter rose again, fuller now, almost childlike. It echoed off the clay walls. It danced through the smoke. Her aunt's eyes widened. She clutched her throat with both hands. I can't breathe." She dropped to her knees, gasping. The others scrambled back, knocking bowls aside. The stew spilled. The yams went cold. Only Ugana stood still. She stepped toward her bowl. The laughter grew softer, like it recognized her presence. Her stepbrother hissed, "What did you do?" Ugana looked at him. And smiled. Not the stretch of mouth they'd forced her into all her life. Not the desperate curl of someone trying to earn a meal or survive another slap. This smile was clean. Quiet. Full of teeth and truth. The kind of smile that made the night hush. "I did nothing," she said. The bowl laughed again, one final soft chuckle. Then silence. Her aunt, still gasping, looked up at her through watery eyes. Ugana turned and walked away. She was no longer hungry. And never again would she say a name that wasn't hers. It began as something small. Pause. A wrinkle in the usual cruelty. Her stepbrother, halfway through the evening chant, suddenly forgot what came next. He stammered, clapped off beat, then laughed to cover his confusion. Her aunt waved it off as tiredness. Her stepmother muttered that maybe the pepper had made her dizzy. But Ugana knew. She had felt it when she woke that morning. The space around her had shifted. The very air in the house had softened. The floorboards no longer creaked when she moved. The wind from the broken wall no longer blew cold. And most of all, the house, which once recoiled at her silence, flinched at her defiance, now sighed gently around her, like a home finally released from remembering something too bitter. The morning meal came and with it the call, "Ugana, come." Except that no one said it. Her stepmother opened her mouth to summon her, but no word came. Her lips moved. Her brow furrowed. Then she frowned, unsure, and called instead, "You, girl." Ugana stood in the doorway watching. The woman's eyes flicked up, startled. "You heard me." "I did," Ugana said, voice calm. The woman hesitated. "Why didn't you come when I called?" "You didn't call me." Her stepmother paused. "I said you're," she blinked rapidly. "What's wrong with my tongue today?" She grumbled and turned back to the fire. At breakfast, her cousins whispered behind their palms. One of them nudged the other. "Say it," he hissed. "You say it." "No, you." They argued back and forth, then turned to her and simply gestured with their hands. "You know who you are," one mumbled. Ugana smiled softly and sat down without asking. Her bowl was full. No one stopped her. By midday, panic had spread. The aunt stood in the middle of the compound, turning slowly. What was her name again? The girl, my niece, what was she called? No one answered. The stepbrother scratched his head. "I said it yesterday. I'm sure I said it." "But what was it?" the aunt pressed. Yuji, Agni? Ajani? Okama? A cousin offered. No, that's not right. Her stepmother's face twisted in frustration. She marched toward Ugana and grabbed her wrist. Say it, she growled. Say your name. Ugana tilted her head. I already did, she said. When? When I buried the other one. The woman's grip loosened. Ugana stepped back. The sun carved light around her bare shoulders, and for a moment she looked almost translucent. Not ghostly, but too real to be contained by name or form. That night they searched the house. They tore apart her mat, pulled at the thatch roof, searched the floor for signs of spell or sorcery. The aunt even spit into a bowl of water and watched it closely, whispering charms under her breath. Nothing worked. No one could speak the name. When they tried to chant again, the words stuttered, broke apart. The rhyme lost rhythm. The children giggled nervously, unsure what was missing. The usual harmony of cruelty fell silent, like a drumskin stretched too tight and torn. The house groaned once in the night, a long, low sound from the rafters. But it was not angry. It sounded relieved. Ugana slept peacefully. Her breath matched the wind outside. Her dreams were full of trees. She walked through the rooms the next morning like someone returning to a place they once fled. The walls didn't breathe against her anymore. The floor didn't sag beneath her feet. The doors didn't squeal. She passed through like smoke. Her cousin stared as she walked by. I know you, he whispered. Then say it, she replied. He opened his mouth. Tried. Failed. Her aunt sat on the porch combing her own hair, muttering, I had it just yesterday. I know it's there. But it wasn't. The house had forgotten. And what the house forgot, the people couldn't hold. Ugana, no longer called, no longer summoned, moved freely now. She touched the walls and they didn't flinch. She drank from the calabash and the water stayed sweet. She walked into rooms and was not chased out. She went to the room where the curses used to echo loudest. The back room. The one where her stepmother once locked her in for 2 days with no food. She stood in the doorway now. The room didn't recognize her. She smiled. Behind her, her stepmother appeared, panting. You girl. What did you do? Why can't I say? Her voice faltered. She reached out. Ugana stepped aside. The woman stumbled past her and stared into the empty room. She doesn't live here anymore, Ugana said quietly. Her stepmother turned. Who? Ugana blinked. Exactly. And walked away. From that day forward they stopped trying. They referred to her in mutters, in gestures, in vague descriptions. The girl. That one. Her. But never again the name. Because it no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the soil where it was buried. And to the wind where her true name sang. The drums began early that morning. Not frantic, not joyful, just steady. A heartbeat for the village. The feast was to celebrate the planting moon, the first rains, and the return of green. Every household brought something. Carved yams, bitter leaf stew, dried meat, oil-soaked rice, baskets of fruit split open like secrets. The air was thick with fire smoke, salt, and sweat. Ugana walked through it all unnoticed. Not because she was hiding, but because none of them could call her. The name they once spat at her like phlegm had vanished from their tongues. They called her child, girl, you there, but not Ugana. That name was rotting somewhere beneath the forest floor, curled in silence and wet soil. She had buried it deep. Now a new name moved through her body like breath, a name. She hadn't spoken it aloud yet. Not truly. Only in dreams. Only to the trees. But tonight was the feast. Tonight the village would hear. The tables were set in a wide circle around the fire pit. Elders sat at the head. Children ran underfoot. Women brushed flies from steaming trays. Men poured palm wine into hollowed-out calabashes and threw bones to lazy dogs. The fire was high. Shadows danced against clay walls. Ugana stood at the edge of it all, waiting, watching. Her feet were bare, her wrapper simple, her eyes bright. She hadn't eaten all day. But she wasn't hungry. When the sun finally dipped and the first round of food was passed, she stepped forward. No one stopped her. Most didn't even notice. She walked slowly, her hands at her sides, through rows of laughter and chewing, toward the center of the feast. The drumbeats slowed. The fire hissed. She stopped beside the main table where the chief sat flanked by elders. Her stepmother was 2 rows back, speaking with her mouth full. Her aunt was laughing at a joke that no one else had heard. The air smelled of pepper and overripe fruit. Ugana placed 1 foot on the central stone near the fire, and said clear and calm, "My name is a name." Everything stopped. The fire cracked just once and then stood still, frozen mid-flicker. The flames leaned backward. A gust of wind spiraled through the courtyard, curling through the tables, lifting grains of rice and tiny peels of yam. At the same moment, something subtle but unmistakable happened. The food spoiled. Quietly. Quickly. The stew thickened to sludge. The rice curled inward, darkened. The bitter leaf turned sour. Calabashes of wine bubbled, hissed, then spat. Children dropped pieces from their hands. Women sniffed, confused. Men lifted lids and frowned. One man near the center vomited into his lap. People stared around in confusion, then alarm. Ghana stepped closer to the fire. She turned to the elders, her voice steady. "You fed me poison," she said. "You served it with your songs, your rules, your chants. You made me say my name with shame in my mouth. You tied my hunger to humiliation. You taught the children to laugh with their teeth and spit with their prayers." The chief's hand trembled. "You," one elder began, but his tongue stumbled. "Say it," Ghana invited. "Go ahead." They couldn't. Not her old name. And not her new one. Because a name didn't belong to them. It was never theirs to call. The fire shuddered. Then roared. Blue light licked the sky. Ghana looked down at the feast table. Her fingers hovered above the rotten bowls. "This is not my doing," she said. "It is yours. This is what happens when the nameless are fed grief. When you chew on silence and teach it to sing." Her aunt stood now, pale, unsure. "You think you're a spirit?" Ghana turned. "No. I think I am a mirror." She stepped back from the stone, her feet bare but firm. "You see me now and the food turns. But I've always been here. You just fed me like I was a dog." A hush. No one moved. The fire snapped again, sending sparks up like wild seeds. "I buried the name you gave me," Ghana said. "But I've kept the memory. And memories are heavier than names." The chief's eyes were glassy. He whispered, "A name. Just once." And the wind sighed in response, soft and low, like a grandmother who had waited too long to be remembered. Ghana stepped away from the table, not backward, not down, but through. People parted for her. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Behind her, the food curdled in its bowls. Flies gathered, not in hunger, but mourning. The feast of the unnamed had begun. And no one would forget the taste. Time passed. Not quickly, not slowly, but like a river beneath thick vines, quiet and certain. The village never spoke of the spoiled feast, though no one forgot it. Something had shifted that night, something permanent. The fire hadn't gone out, but it burned differently now, lower, steadier. The laughter at meals came less often, but when it did, it was real. They no longer called her anything at all. But the children watched her. Ghana, or a name as the trees knew her, began walking with her shoulders upright, her arms loose at her sides. She no longer flinched when someone reached too fast. She smiled now, but only when she meant it. And when she did, people grew quiet. Her smile held no pretense, no curled edges from fear or forced joy. It was a simple thing, steady, wide, but soft. Like truth saying, "I know what was done. And I'm still here." And that truth, when seen on a girl's face, unsettled even the boldest tongues. They began calling her the girl whose smile spoke truth. Never to her face, but in whispers, in firelit stories, in the moments after she passed. It wasn't a title given in ceremony. It was breathed into being, the way names should be. Children who were once made to chant against her now avoided cruel rhymes. Some even sat near her when no one was watching. One by one, the brave ones asked quiet questions. Did it hurt? How did you make them stop? Do names really rot? She didn't always answer directly. But she listened. And she began to teach. Not from a stool or a podium, but with eyes, with silence, with stories told while weaving or stirring pots or mending broken mats. Names can be borrowed, she told them one evening, but they can also be returned. In time, a new tradition was born, not from decree but from hunger. Not the kind that lived in bellies but the kind that twisted in bones. Every season, under the first full moon after the new rains, the children would gather in the clearing beyond the compound, where the trees leaned in like old friends. There, a single child was allowed to rename themselves. They would speak their old name first with respect, then let it go. The new name was whispered into a calabash of clean water and poured over their hands. And when they returned home, the name stuck. No one mocked. Not even the elders. Because the forest remembered what had happened when they refused to listen. And each child who renamed themselves walked a little straighter afterward, eyes bright, voice steady. The other children watched them with awe, and just a hint of envy. Sometimes the wind carried a name back. A name long buried. and it hummed low through the compound walls. Her name. Just once. Then silence. And people would pause, forks halfway to mouths, and listen. They said if her name was ever spoken again at a meal, it meant truth had entered the room. So before each meal now, there was always a moment of silence. Not prayer, not duty, but listening. Listening for her name. Not the one that was buried, but the one she chose. And in that silence, the village slowly became new.